With the possible end of Title 42, the Department of Homeland Security is expecting a surge at the southern border. My guest recommends a new strategy to reflect the changing conditions there. Teresa Cardinal Brown is the Managing Director of Immigration and Cross-Border Policy at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Teresa, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here. Thanks so much.
First, tell us about the demographics of the people that are showing up at the southern border and how that has been changing recently.
Sure, thank you. For most of the history that we have been guarding our U.S.-Mexico border from immigration, the majority of people arriving to that border, 99%, were Mexicans, usually single adults, usually males, looking for work. But what we have seen, at least since 2014, is a significant demographic shift, starting with Central Americans from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, but also unaccompanied children, families, much more vulnerable people. And what that means is that the processes, procedures, even the infrastructure at the border is not really compatible with managing that type of migration, in part because we can't send Central Americans directly back to Mexico, at least unless Mexico agrees, but also because they're asking for asylum. And that is a different kind of process.
Well, speaking of asylum, it's also Russians and Ukrainians are now showing up at the border with Mexico.
Yeah, and what has happened, I think, in the last 5 years is that it's not just Central Americans anymore. It's all of Latin America. And as we're seeing, people from other places around the world.
So you recommend separating the processing of asylum seekers with those crossing illegally. Explain that.
Yeah, so since 9/11, obviously, and since the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, our Border Patrol has engaged a lot in law enforcement matters and looked at the border as a security issue. And certainly there is security issues that we have to address at the border. There's contraband, there's drugs, there's smugglers. But most of the people arriving are simply migration issues. They are people seeking security. They are not a security threat to the United States. And yet the Border Patrol is spending most of its time dealing with this population rather than looking for the true security threats that they should be doing. So what I am suggesting, and the Bipartisan Policy Center has been looking at this for several years, is that we need to kind of think of these as two different problems at the border. There's a migration management problem, which is about how we receive and process these people that are coming to the border seeking asylum. And then there's a security issue that we need to address separately. Although Border Patrol is going to encounter everybody who arrives to the border, if it's quickly determined that these people are not security or a law enforcement issue, I believe that that should be a separate process with separate people. Let our Border Patrol agents get back to securing the border for what they need to and put the migration management in the hands of a new set of facilities, a new maybe operational set of personnel who aren't the same.
So before we talk about the personnel, let's talk about the infrastructure that would be required.
Yeah. So our Border Patrol stations look a lot like your local police precinct. There's jail cells, there's seats where people can be handcuffed to the tables while they're put through their processing, fingerprinting stations, all of that. And these facilities are meant to hold people for not very long, 72 hours, and they're not certainly suitable for families or small children. So we need a different kind of facility. We've created these expansion facilities, temporary processing facilities that get overcrowded. But I think we've seen them as sort of temporary things that we set up for a short period of time. But I think we need to recognize that we're now almost 10 years into a shift, and we need a different type of infrastructure that's permanently available at the border.
So what about the personnel enhancements or additions?
So the personnel enhancements really are about getting people whose first job is about migration at the border. And that means maybe a new type of personnel. I mean, the Border Patrol has created these processing coordinators that are not law enforcement agents per se, but I think we need to expand that pool. We also need to recognize that we probably need a permanent presence of our asylum officers at the border now. And we need to think about our immigration courts, which is where most of these people are ending up. Putting them into a process that's a growing backlog in our existing immigration courts doesn't work. Let's set up new courts that are specifically for the border areas that can do these cases in a much more expeditious way.
Well, everything costs money. And Congress did fund technology improvements for Customs and Border Protection in 2017. What has that been used for? And is what you're recommending a shift of funding, or does it require new funding?
It probably will require new funding. The technology enhancements are mainly for surveillance at the border, for sensors and aerial technologies and things like that. This is a different kind of process, and I think it's going to be some combination of funding at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that has the Asylum Office, obviously the immigration courts. Maybe we need FEMA in there to help with the humanitarian needs of these people, but I think we need to think about it differently.
You know, I don't need to tell you that this topic inflames passions on both sides of the aisle. You've been looking at it for a long time, so you know. Why hasn't there been progress made on this topic?
I think part of the reason is that we have been depending on our strategy of deterrence, which has been our strategy at the border for 3 decades now, at least since the 1990s. And the idea that by delivering consequences such as prosecuting people and putting them in jail or making sure that they're expeditedly deported, that will deter people from coming. But I think what we're seeing now is that those kind of deterrence measures don't have the same impact for this migrant flow that we're seeing right now. So that's why I think we need to shift a little bit and think about them as different functions. That processing people in an expedited way so that they come to the conclusion of their case within a matter of months rather than a matter of years. And then if they don't qualify to stay, get sent back at that point, might be a better way to manage this than trying to make the situation harder or harsher for them to cross, because the situations they're fleeing, frankly, are not going to be harder than what we would do to them at the border.
All right, well, Teresa, we appreciate you coming in and talking to us about this.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.